Once upon a time, the transport ship Hunter Gratzner drifted through space, carrying 40 folks to the Tangier system. Everyone was deep in cryo-sleep except one, the notorious criminal Richard Riddick. Law officer William J. Johns was escorting him back to prison, but everything went haywire when a chunk of comet debris slammed into the ship. The crew woke up in a panic, and before the captain could even jump out of his cryopod, the debris took him out. Carolyn Fry, the docking pilot, and Greg Owens, the navigator, quickly realized they were crashing into a mysterious planet. They scrambled to take control and send out a distress call. Carolyn even cleared parts of the ship to slow their fall, planning to jettison the passenger cabin. Just then, Greg stopped her in her tracks when he saw what she was about to do. As the ship crashed, Johns managed to get out of his stasis pod, clinging to a post as the passenger cabin broke apart and pieces of the ship flew off. Soon enough, survivors emerged from their pods and the word spread that Riddick had escaped from his pod. Johns rushed below the shattered cabin and caught Riddick trying to strangle him with his feet. Johns broke free and subdued him. While others were searching for survivors, a stowaway kid named Jack was discovered. Not long after, Carolyn found the grim sight of Greg impaled by a metal rod. A passenger named Shaza warned her not to pull it out because it was too near Greg's heart. Carolyn then sent everyone to search for the anastophene at the back of the cabin, only to learn that part of the ship had vanished. She told the others to leave her with Greg so she could have a moment to herself. Later, when the survivors rummaged through the cargo for food and water, they only found bottles of wine stashed in a sarcophagus belonging to an antique dealer, Paris Ogilvy. Imam Abu al-Walid, who was with 3 Muslim boys, pointed out that the wine was useless since they weren't allowed to drink, especially during the Hajj. Johns argued that there wasn't anything else to drink, but al-Walid insisted that water was out there somewhere in the desert. Meanwhile, Riddick was handcuffed to a post in another section of the ship, yet he slipped free when he noticed the top was shattered. John soon discovered part of his handcuff in the sand and quickly rounded up a team to track him down. Outside the wreckage, Jack, Shaza, and her buddy Zeke rigged up some breathing aids to get more oxygen. Carolyn asked Al-Walid to join her in searching for water before the planet's 2 suns set. They then learned that the planet would never really go dark because a 3rd sun was rising on the opposite side. Johns figured out that Riddick was headed toward the rising blue sun. He'd left his handcuff in the opposite direction to throw them off. So, Carolyn, Johns, Al-Walid, and the 3 boys, Ali, Hassan, and Suleiman, set off toward that blue glow to recapture Riddick and find water. Through a telescope, John spotted some trees in the distance and guessed water was nearby. When they got there, they found that the trees were actually parts of a gigantic animal's skeleton, with bones scattered all around. Al-Walid surmised it was like a communal graveyard. While resting by the giant bones, Carolyn admitted that she almost jettisoned the passenger cabin during the crash, but Greg had stopped her. Meanwhile, hidden in the darkness among the bones, Riddick crouched with a knife in hand. As their conversation ended, he quietly snipped a lock of Carolyn's hair and took a deep whiff. The group pressed on and soon stumbled upon an abandoned mining settlement. Carolyn went inside one of the buildings, trying to get the lights on with her voice. But nothing happened. Then she found a solar-powered orrery and realized the planet never had lights because it never went dark. Rushing back outside, she screamed with joy upon discovering a dropship. Back at the crash site, Paris, Shaza, and Jack heard strange noises coming from the back of the ship. They immediately hid, ready to fight. Shaza nearly attacked a man approaching them until they realized he was another survivor. Zeke, thinking he was Riddick, shot him. By the time he realized his mistake, it was too late. The body was dragged to a mass grave Zeke had dug for the dead. Suddenly, something yanked Zeke into the darkness, prompting him to fire his gun repeatedly. Hearing the commotion, Shaza raced over to the mass grave, uncovered it, and found blood by a hole, with Riddick standing there. He fled, but Johns intercepted him and snatched away his goggles that shielded his eyes from daylight. Before Johns could lock him up, Shaza struck him, blaming him for Zeke's disappearance. Later on, Carolyn confronted Riddick about what he'd done to Zeke's body, but Riddick only grumbled that they had bigger problems. When Jack asked how he got his eyes, Riddick explained he'd been locked up in prison where he never saw daylight. And when he finally got out, he paid a doctor to operate so he could see in the dark. Riddick swore he didn't kill Zeke, so Carolyn decided to search for his body in the hole. With a rope tied around her waist, she crawled into a cavern with holes in the roof and soon discovered Zeke's severed foot, along with creepy creatures lurking about. Panicked, she tried to climb out, but something tugged her rope. Jack heard her screams, and before long, Johns broke through a wall and pulled Carolyn out. As she tried to walk away, something pulled her back, so they cut the rope immediately. Realizing that Riddick had been telling the truth all along, Johns unchained him on the condition that he hand over his weapons and follow orders. Riddick even grabbed John's gun, but then handed it back instead of killing him. The group then set out for a settlement to fetch a power cell for the dropship. When they arrived, Carolyn discovered they needed 5 more cells. Meanwhile, Jack, who oddly idolized Riddick, shaved her head and put on goggles to look more like him. As the survivors refreshed themselves with water from a moisture machine, Allie wandered into a coring room. They debated why the mining team had left, but Riddick claimed they all perished because their stuff was still there. Suddenly, the roof of the coring room swung open and bat-like creatures scattered in the sunlight. The creatures attacked Ali, forcing him to hide in another room. Hearing his screams, the others burst into the coring room. When Al-Walid opened one door, hundreds of creatures poured out and rushed toward a mine shaft. Not long after, Ali's mangled body dropped to the ground. While Al-Walid buried the boy, the group dropped a flare into the shaft and discovered human bones scattered at the bottom. Riddick figured the miners had hidden in the safe coring room, but had forgotten to cover the shaft. Johns noted that the creatures seemed to stick to the dark, so their only hope was to stay in the daylight. Carolyn noticed that the last sample from the shaft was dated 22 years ago and guessed it was important. Using the orrery, she found that an eclipse plunged the planet into total darkness every 22 years. Carolyn told Johns they had to grab the power cells from the crashed ship, but Johns warned that Riddick might hijack it if they weren't careful. He even mentioned that Riddick could fly a ship, so they planned to grab the cells at the last minute. Later, Riddick hinted to Carolyn that Johns couldn't be trusted, that he wasn't a real law officer, but just a bounty hunter. He said Johns wouldn't kill him because he'd make more money capturing him alive. Carolyn stood by Johns, and Riddick then threw in a jab about Johns having a drug problem. It wasn't long before Carolyn confronted Johns and caught him injecting morphine into his eye. Johns insisted it wasn't a problem, but Carolyn reminded him he could have given Greg a vial to ease his pain when he was dying. Johns admitted he used morphine because Riddick had stabbed him near his spine and left a piece of the shiv behind. Their argument was cut short when the eclipse began, and the group raced back to the crash site in a solar-powered buggy to retrieve the power cells. Darkness fell as another planet's rings blocked the two suns, and soon bat-like creatures swarmed. The survivors dashed to the cargo hold while the creatures swooped in. Riddick and Shaza tried to reach the cargo hold, but they had to drop to the ground to avoid the attack. Shaza got up to run, but Riddick stayed put. The flying beasts returned, grabbed Shaza, and carried her off. Riddick peered out from the cargo hold and saw more creatures emerging from distant spires. The group hid deeper inside when one creature clawed through a wall. While the others hacked through to find another exit, Riddick noticed a creature feasting on something in the dark. Hassan joined him as the creature finished its meal. Riddick told Hassan to stay still and ordered Carolyn to keep using a cutting torch on the walls. In the chaos, Hassan ran off in panic and was caught by another creature. As more beasts appeared, Riddick dashed toward them but fell when bright light hurt his eyes. One creature, blinded by the light, tried to flee but was shot by Johns. As they shined a torch on the dying beast, they discovered that light was its weakness. With no chance of riding the buggy, the survivors decided to head back on foot to the dropship. Al-Walid noted that the eclipse would last too long for them to wait for the suns to rise again, so they returned to the ship's main cabin to grab the power cells and any extra light they could find. Riddick warned everyone to check for deep cuts because the creatures could smell blood. Soon they trekked back to the mining settlement, dragging the batteries behind them with Riddick leading the way. The beasts followed, but stayed at bay because of the lights. Paris accidentally dropped a flashlight, and Jack dashed to pick it up. When the creatures closed in, Paris panicked and dragged one of the batteries with him, causing the glow to fade and leaving them exposed. Then a creature stabbed Paris. In his final moments, Paris took one last sip of wine from his flask, held up a lighter to his face, and spat it out. The burst of flame startled the creatures, but they swarmed him moments later. When the group reached a canyon, Riddick realized they needed a different route because the creatures could sense if a girl was bleeding. The survivors were puzzled. Carolyn wasn't hurt, until Riddick revealed that Jack was actually a girl who had pretended to be a boy, so people wouldn't mess with her. Carolyn suggested going back to the crash site, but Johns objected, saying Carolyn had tried to jettison the passenger cabin to win them over. As they continued toward the settlement, Johns pulled Riddick aside and suggested they kill someone to use the body as bait to distract the creatures. When Johns asked Riddick to kill Jack, Riddick argued they might need someone bigger. The tension exploded into a fight when Johns realized he was being set up as bait. Riddick drew his shiv and told Johns to stay in the light while he tried to cut him. The struggle was fierce. Johns managed to knock Riddick down and snatch his shiv, but Riddick overpowered him, snatched back his weapon, and slashed Johns' back. Johns loaded his gun, but before he could shoot, Riddick vanished into the darkness. As Johns searched for him, a creature impaled him and bit off his head. Riddick rejoined the group and told them to keep moving toward the settlement. When he announced that Johns was dead, Jack started crying, but Riddick told her not to mourn him. The survivors sprinted through the canyon, keeping Jack in the center so the creatures wouldn't pick her up. Riddick trailed closely, dragging the power cells behind him. A swarm approached, but the creatures couldn't get too close because of the bright lights. As they ran, Carolyn spotted some of the beasts fighting each other. Passing through a massive skeleton, a creature grabbed Suleiman's leg and they fought it off by igniting some fuel that Suleiman had dropped. Riddick moved on while the others tended to Suleiman's wound. Jack tried to follow, but a creature attacked her. Riddick hesitated, then charged at the beast, fighting until he managed to slash its flesh with his knife. As they pressed forward, rain began to fall, forcing them to pause and take cover to protect their torches. Riddick contemplated their next move when suddenly a creature snatched Suleiman and vanished up a cliff. Later, Riddick led them to a cave and sealed the opening to keep them safe. Once inside, he split off to head for the settlement while the cave's torches eventually went out, leaving them with only the glow of insects clinging to the walls. They collected as many as they could in empty bottles to make new lamps. Worried that Riddick might leave without them, Carolyn left the cave and made her way to the settlement. There, she found Riddick prepping the dropship. He opened it and told her to leave the others behind. At first, Carolyn stepped inside, but then she lunged at him, insisting she wouldn't abandon anyone. Riddick subdued her and asked if she was willing to risk her life for Jack and Al-Walid. When Carolyn declared she was, Riddick went back to fetch them. On their way, the group encountered more creatures blocking the path, but they managed to slip past through a narrow opening. Carolyn, Jack, and Al-Walid reached the ship while Riddick fought off a creature. Hiding in the beast's blind spot, he was suddenly attacked from behind. Hearing his screams, Carolyn raced back for him. Soon, Riddick reappeared with a wounded leg, and as Carolyn helped him up, a flying creature stabbed her and carried her away. Not long after, Riddick climbed into the pilot's seat and started the dropship's engines. He then shut them off for a moment, waiting for the creatures to close in. Terrified, Jack begged him to fly. When the creatures finally tried to break in, Riddick revved the engine, and the blast of flame and bright exhaust lights sent the beasts scattering. Once they were in outer space, Riddick told Jack to let the authorities know that he died on the planet.